Yo, this is Nathan, the nerd pastor of Checkpoint Church, the church for nerds, geeks, and gamers. And I think in 5 years, pastors and churches will have to work towards what it looks like to have a digital congregation. So whether that be on Facebook groups or on Discord, my personal preference, or a Slack group, or maybe we'll have some kind of new app out there in 5 years, but there's got to be some kind of digital community building beyond just posting your sermons, beyond your newsletter, beyond advertisements. There needs to be some kind of fellowship hall online, some kind of digital gathering space where we're able to share thoughts and memories and ideas and prayer concerns and requests and get to know one another in a digital space. With how many people are online and with how convenient it is to gather online, I think that we'll see a boom in a digital monasticism where people are able to get to know each other in digital spaces.
This is Pastoring in the Digital Parish, your resource and connection for leading ministry in digital spaces. My name is Ryan Dunn. A digital fellowship hall. I love that idea of the future church, from past professor and active listener Nathan Webb. A little good news and bad news in this episode of Pastoring in the Digital Parish. The bad thing being that this will be the final session of season 4. The scheduling stuff has really kind of hit the wall between some guest reschedules and my own upcoming travel schedule. Doing more episodes at a high level for the next several weeks, that just looks a little bit iffy. That means, though, that the good news is that we're primed to get started on the next season already, which was originally set to start in 2023, but it's now going to get underway before the end of the year, which means we can dive into topics like digital Advent and Christmas contemplative groups online and who knows what else. I can also say that we're going to start to talk about trends in research, in church marketing, and cultivating online communities because we can't learn enough about that. And some topics that you suggest, which you can do by emailing me at digitalparish@umcom.org. How can we help you in resourcing your digital ministry? Let us know, please. Again, digitalparish@umcom.org. In this session of Pastoring in the Digital Parish, we're going to do what we do at the end of every season, really, which is to give a snapshot of some of the key learnings from that season's adjunct professors. This season, we made a turn from talking about the now to really talking about what is yet to come. It's the now but not yet aspect of digital ministry. So I'm going to share 9 ideas or predictions, or you could actually call it 10 ideas or predictions if you count Nathan's, about the future shape of ministry based on what I heard from our guests through this season. So based on what we know today, these are 9 or 10 possibly surprising predictions for the future of digital ministry. Again, with a keen focus on ministry in the digital space. You get it. Prediction number 1. Yes, we're diving right in. Very few ministries are going to be geographically defined. Ryan Panzer noted how our locations of faith formation have changed. They've already changed. A few years ago, we could argue that the primary locale of faith formation was the worship space or sanctuary. Maybe we could have argued that it was the Sunday school room or wherever a small group met. But in either case, the location of faith formation was centralized geographically. We've already begun to take our faith formation on the go with us, and this trend is going to continue. So we may still be primarily formed through the Sunday morning sermon, but we're increasingly interacting with the Sunday morning sermon in spaces outside of the sanctuary. We've taken it with us to our living rooms, to our commuting space, to our walks in a green space, to the coffee shop. I don't know. We've taken it so many places. We could also argue, however, that we're no longer being primarily formed by that Sunday sermon. Instead, we're finding different ways to interact with faith formation. In some cases, we're interacting with little nuggets of knowledge posted to our social feeds in the form of a quote meme. Or we're listening to 2 of our friends process their stories in facing racism through our church's podcast. The case here is that we're bringing the nuggets of faith formation into our space instead of going towards a special geographic location for faith formation. See what's going on? Because of this, the neighborhood model of church is fading. It was already in decline as attractional megachurch model had really driven people to drive past many more geographically convenient churches in order to participate in the community of their choice. But now the neighborhood poll is even weaker. Instead, our faith communities are going to be much more defined by values as opposed to geography. So we'll build bridges of connection, not by building a faith community in key geographic areas, but instead we're going to build those bridges and points of invitation by providing signposts of affinity. Here's what I mean. Glendale United Methodist Church, we've talked about them in past seasons. They're here in Nashville. They're named after the neighborhood in which the church is located. A few years ago, Glendale was a dying congregation. When they seized on a specific mission to make spiritual connections with specific people in mind, then they began a period of growth that would make a lot of us a little envious, honestly. For sure, I hope that my church in Nashville, one that's very similar in situation and even with a very similar name, I hope that they are able to follow this style of outreach. Glendale has effectively utilized digital spaces to consistently communicate what is important in their faith community, who they are, and what they do. Because of their transparent communication, Glendale draws people who suspect they're going to find connection and meaning within the church community. Some of these people live well outside of the Glendale neighborhood. And because of that fact, their proximity sometimes limits their ability to participate in in-person events. I found this to be the case in my own church as well. We have a number of people who are definitely part of our church community who rarely, if ever, are able to join us in the sanctuary on Sunday mornings, at least in person, that is. But they're still interacting with our online material. They give towards the mission of the church. They converse regularly with the pastoral staff and our members. So are they not active participants in the church community because we don't see them in the pews? I'm sure we're both on board in saying that, yes, they are, in fact, active. And that leads to prediction number 2. Attendance is not the metric of the future. Excuse me, a little early morning coffee refresh there. Attendance is not the metric of the future. Hopefully, this little prediction comes as relief because in reality, it's likely that we've been watching a decline in our worship attendance since 2009. That has been the reality for a majority of churches. Let me say that again so you can hear it. A majority of churches in the U.S. have seen consistent decline in worship attendance since about 2008 or 2009. And of course, that's become even more pronounced since 2020. It's neither healthy nor do I believe altogether accurate to measure church vitality through attendance. So, what then is our metric of the future? Well, I don't know yet. I haven't heard a definitive answer. So from my blind spot of ignorance, I can only prognosticate that the metric of the future is relative to each faith community. I think in those terms, the metric of the future will be a combination of some kind of engagement numbers. Those numbers may include things like email opens or financial contributors or Twitch subs or Discord registrants. And this is why the future metrics will be relative because of where and how our churches will engage with people. For a church or ministry that is heavily engaged in streaming on Twitch, like Methodist Gaming or past pastoring in the Digital Parish participants, Crossfire Faith and Gaming, for those ministries, an average of Twitch participants during their live streams is a very telling metric. For my church, the size of the email list might be a fair metric, or an average of newsletters opened. That could be a telling metric. Other ministries might point towards Facebook followers or average post reach, or they might dig into the weeds and come up with a formula that averages together disparate statistics and puts them into a relative performance metric, kind of like QB rating in football or wins above replacement in baseball. Actually, I would love to hear if someone is doing something like that. Email me again, digitalparish@umcom.org. These metrics of vitality need to be adaptable because, according to prediction number 3, our future models of ministry are going to be fluid and entrepreneurial. We are going to exercise the ghost of church past like never before. And we've all heard the voice of that ghost. It's the voice that meets our new ideas with the saying, but we've never done it that way before. Ooh. Or we've just always done it this way. Ooh. Instead of leading future ministry based on pre-existing models, based on the ways that we've always done things, we're instead going to lead with mission. So let's analyze this using one of the sacred cows of many churches, the confirmation program. I know we're getting to meddling here. The mission of confirmation, at least in the congregations that I have worked with, has been to equip young people who had previously been baptized to take ownership of their baptismal vows. Now, typically, we've done our equipping through something like a Wednesday night or Sunday morning class that provided snapshots on the history of our faith tradition, important points of theology, maybe some history of our congregation, and of course, silly games and object lessons. We design all these sessions with the expectation that we're aiding our students in their process of meaning making through our faith tradition. But here's the new reality. Young people's processes for meaning making are much different today than they were a couple decades ago. It's much more personally informed. It's quite a bit more interactive. It's based quite a bit more on experience than it is on information. So, what if the confirmation process were to take a wiki-type approach that is largely independent of the classroom? In this case, students might learn about church history by independently interviewing longtime church members and then posting their findings in a forum. Or they can be invited to share resources they found meaningful in understanding something like baptism. Perhaps the whole class can utilize a shared app that delivers a daily prayer, challenge, a theological point of information, and an invitation for feedback or response. The COVID pandemic presented a unique opportunity to really reshape some of the sacred cows of decades past. The Vital Church in 5 years will continue to play with altering models of execution while staying focused on the mission of the ministry. And here we'll want to heed the warnings of Andrew Root, because he noted that we are often lured into making innovation the mission instead of utilizing innovation in pursuit of the mission. If your confirmation program works as it is, that's okay. You don't need to change merely for the sake of change. But in too many cases, we found ourselves wishing for the opportunity to change long-standing models for the sake of efficacy. Vital churches are going to do that. And then, guess what? Then they're going to do it again. So, now that you're ready to rattle cages and challenge sacred cows, let me share with you prediction number 4. Vital churches are going to say hard things. Coffee break. This is a lot of solo talking today, sorry. Today's culture demands transparency and authenticity. They value it. For years, again, as a youth pastor, I watched young people leave the churches I was part of, not because our churches took too strong of a stance on particular issues, but because our churches didn't really take stands at all. They wanted to engage the topics, and they wanted to converse with their spiritual mentors about those tough topics. The problem was that our spiritual mentors, and I have to admit, this often included myself as I was the youth pastor, we shied away from addressing controversial topics simply because we feared that announcing our personal views would be a barrier to relationship and might turn some people off. The irony was that our young people were sometimes turned off simply because we wouldn't articulate a stance on a hot button topic like LGBTQIA inclusion or social justice movements like Black Lives Matter or immigration reform, or you know the list. Being silent on controversial topics doesn't actually help. Again, the cultural movement is towards transparency and authenticity. Here we hear that again. And that simply means that we should embrace the opportunities that have arisen in the digital age for sharing ourselves with others. We want to make it easy for people to get to know us and our faith communities. Again, I'll draw back to Glendale UMC as an institutional example of how this is done, because you don't have to surf their feeds too long to see who they are and what they care about. And I'm sure that some of the things they say, they actually do turn some people off. But for those looking to be a part of a community sharing those values, what they say makes it very easy to know what Glendale is all about. It's all right up front. It's right there. And that leads to prediction number 5. Because we are transparent, well, then we will be niched. Both Ryan Panzer and Andy Root alluded to the niches of ministry. If you remember from our conversation, Andy Root talked about his habit of naming people like Seinfeld characters. There was brown turtleneck guy, an Applebee's boy, synod executive guy. These characters were actually archetypes that Andy created to help understand messaging and storytelling. We need to build ministry archetypes, personas with specific characteristics that help us communicate more effectively. In the book writing world, when an author is peddling a book to publishers, they're told they need to have an audience in mind. And the more specific the audience is, the better. Publishers immediately dismiss any material with an audience of, quote, anyone, end quote. In digital spaces, we're also going to get dismissed when our audiences consist of anyone. Instead, we're going to grow wide by drilling down to specific people in our audience. And in the case of ministry, the audience can start with the actual real people who are already involved. What characteristics do they have in common? Where do your passions intersect their passions? You can mentally kind of Venn diagram all this stuff out and then create an archetype based on those shared values, based on those shared passions and interests. And then that archetype or archetypes define your niche. This is one of the reasons that I believe we're able to learn so much from the online gaming ministries that we've run across. These ministries are very niche specific, right? They are people who are spiritually curious and into gaming. Often, it means that they're into specific types of games even. And Fresh Expressions is a movement that has been preaching to the niching of ministry for years. The use of digital spaces allows us to really pursue relationships with people based upon interest and passion. And Ryan Panzer noted that through his experience, he sees that the more niche a digital community becomes, the more vibrant it is likely to be. Ready for prediction number 6? We'll build ministries for people who will never join, quote, big church, end quote. One of the counter arguments to churches streaming worship is that if we continue to do so, if we continue to stream, then some people will stop attending worship in person. I'm going to counter that thought a little bit with this. They're probably going to stop attending anyways. The streaming option allows us to continue to engage them during this season of their lives, while also allowing us to engage with people who would never otherwise find a seat in our pews. And if we're building ministries in digital space with the hope that people are just going to kind of enter there and then start showing up on Sunday mornings and feed the old metric of worship attendance, then we're going to encounter a lot of disappointment, frustration, and we're likely going to alienate our new ministry partners. I grew up going to the video game arcade. You remember those places? Mine was called The Machine. It was in the back of Crystal Point Mall. That was a place where I could have the experience of playing video games and connecting with other gamers. I could catch some ideas on how to play NBA Jam better by watching others, and I could discover new games. Well, the mall is gone. Even long before the mall was closed down, the machine closed down. Most of those local mall arcades don't exist anymore. The few remaining video game arcades, they're novelties. But lots of people are still having the experiences that I had in the video game arcade. They're just having those experiences in forums like YouTube, in Twitch. We're being invited now to accept that people can have the same spiritually formative experiences that we've enjoyed in the past, but they might just have them in venues that feel a little foreign to us. The video game arcade feels special to me, mostly because of nostalgia. I doubt my teenage son would find it very meaningful, however, and yet he's still having those same experiences that I had at the machine. I think our expectations that we need to convert people into regular in-person worship attenders is one that is based in nostalgia. We can continue to provide portals for spiritual formation and foundational experiences in different ways that aren't out of comprehension for some of the people we will meet through digital ministry. The invitation is for us to bring more ministry to the people as opposed to bringing more people into the ministry. And prediction number 7 is one of the ways that we can bring more ministry towards people. Ministers of the future are going to be internet trolls. Let me unpack that statement just a little bit after I have another sip of coffee. What I mean by becoming internet trolls is that we are going to actively be searching through the internet to get an idea of what questions people have, what issues they face, and when appropriate, we're going to point towards the ways our faith speaks into those issues. We are not going to hijack conversations or bomb every chat with church invitations. We're going to seek out opportunities to participate in conversation as the people that we are. I intentionally cultivated this practice on my own ministerial life for quite a while. What I did was I joined a bunch of Facebook groups, mostly centered around my own interests. So I joined dads groups and fitness groups and, yes, record collecting groups. And I spent a dedicated amount of time in those groups each day, observing the conversations that were happening therein. Sometimes I participated in those conversations, but more often I use those conversations as a form of social listening, which we learned about with Nelson Musanda. The conversations provide insight and ideas for content that I can build in response. So it's how I know what spiritual practices might impact a dad's mental health, or how fitness feels like a religious experience for some. These days, I've become a bit obsessed with TikTok. I'm trying to understand what drives people to consume the content that they do on that platform. I want to know what it is about some TikTokers that people really respond to. I would simply recommend taking one space, whether that be TikTok like me, or maybe for you, it might be Reddit or Discord or Facebook groups, and spend some time trolling the conversations there. You don't even have to comment. Just get a sense of what needs are being expressed and then challenge yourself to keep that in mind the next time you're crafting your spiritually based content. And then what you do with that content leads us to prediction number 8 for the future. Discipleship and faith formation will be less about imparting info and more about convening conversations. I'm from the Methodist tradition, and I believe that this idea is embedded in our early Methodist expressions. The early Methodist cell groups certainly had a form of catechism, but it was built around questions, not about, presentation. It wasn't so much built around a teacher making a presentation. We've moved into an age when this pedagogy is super valued because today everyone is accepted as an expert, for better or for worse. Let's face it, a teenager can have as much spiritual influence through a TikTok channel as a vetted super pastor can have through a mega church. For the better, this means that everyone has valuable input to offer. We're experiencing the joys and pains of learning from one another. So our jobs as spiritual influencers is twofold. First, we want to provide the venues through which people can ask and respond to spiritual questions. And then secondly, we want to ease off the idea that we are the voices of authority and invest more in the idea that we are voices of influence. We're able to lead through sharing the practices and stories, ideas, and resources that have spiritually impacted our own experiences. But we do so while we invite others into the process as well. In a sense, we're switching from being an Encyclopedia Britannica approach of faith formation to one of Wikipedia. We get to edit and ask for the verification, but we invite users to provide much of the content. Finally, prediction number 9. The pastors and ministers of the future will take seriously their roles as spiritual development coaches. Many pastors do this already. Many more pastors want to do this, but they're pulled from the tasks by administration and organizational stuff. So this prediction doesn't come as a warning to the individuals in the office of minister or pastor as much as it might come as a point of awareness for those setting the expectations of those roles. One of the amazing aspects of digital media is that it provides a personal access to so many people. We want to allow people to get personable with each other through social media. In the social media landscape, people want to be social. They want to interact with each other. So we should be aware that the leaders who will find success in the social world will be able to enjoy enough time to be able to build relationship in digital spaces. Then those leaders can ask questions, they can provide affirmation, they can point towards healthy action plans, maybe even imply some accountability, the things a good coach can do. Great coaches are concerned with players as much as they are the systems of execution. And we want to allow the availability for ministerial leaders to engage in concern for their people. That's all. All right, there are the 9/10 predictions. And that is a wrap on this session and this season. If this podcast is meaningful for you, the best thing that you can do is just listen to another episode. Choose from any one of the season 4 episodes. They all informed this particular session. I'm Ryan Dunn. I'd like to thank resourceumc.org, the online destination for leaders throughout the United Methodist Church. They make this podcast possible. And of course, they host our website, pastoringinthedigitalparish.com, where you can find more online resources for ministry. If you want to connect, check out our Pastoring in the Digital Parish Facebook group. You can also send me questions and ideas for future sessions. Again, that's digitalparish@umcom.org. I'll be in touch soon about season 5. Look for it, I think, towards the beginning of December. In the meantime, peace.